Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Jai Hind. As the founder of Casa, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all participants to this webinar series, the Casa Afghanistan Dialogues Part 2, Unraveling the Conundrum. Casa turns 2 today. We made a humble beginning as a WhatsApp group of friends with common interests, with the aim of sharing articles, information, and views on current and strategic affairs. Over a period of time, our membership grew with a number of experts in the field of strategic affairs joining the fold. Professional discussions, as our members are aware, are held in the forum on a daily basis with webinars such as this one that are organized periodically to discuss important issues. We have also set up a website in order to give access to the views and publications of experts within our group to a larger audience. That we are holding our 20th webinar after the first one was held on 8th of June when the Ladakh intrusion took place, is 20 webinars in 15 months is indicative of the popularity of our webinars, which have been held on a variety of current and strategic subjects, the summaries of which are, as well as the recordings, are available on our website, thecasaforum.in. Today, we have before us a very distinguished panel to help us ravel the conundrum in Afghanistan and the evolving big picture after the power transition to the Taliban, the responsibility of the newly formed government in Afghanistan, and the responsibility of the world community led by the US in continuing nation building and ensuring that Afghanistan does not become a magnet for terrorist groups of all hues. More importantly, this government of Taliban includes many unsavory characters. 17 out of 33 ministers on the UN designated terrorist list, including one with a bounty of $5 million on his head. The impact that this will have on terrorist groups operating in J&K and around the world is very, very serious. Its implications are dangerous, and India especially needs to watch the developments carefully and deal with the fallout firmly. To discuss these issues, we look forward to hearing the views of our panelists. So without further ado, let me introduce all of them. Mr. G. Parthasarathy is an honorary research professor at the Center for Policy Research and a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in New Delhi. He served as the High Commissioner of India to Cyprus, Ambassador to Myanmar, High Commissioner to Australia, to Pakistan, and especially during 1998 and 2000 during Prime Minister Vajpayee's Lahore bus visit and during the Kargil War. Mr. Parthasarathy was spokesman for the Ministry of External Affairs and information advisor in the PMO when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. A much sought after speaker, his areas of interest are developments in India's neighborhood and the issues of economic integration, energy, national security, and terrorism. Welcome to Casa, sir. We look forward to hearing your views. The next panelist is Dr. Tara Kartha, who spent 17 years at the NSCS, which sits at the apex of India's national security architecture. At NSCS, she worked on terrorism and other security-related issues in the neighborhood and had special charge of the NSAB, amongst other responsibilities. Earlier, she was at the IDSA for 8 years, where she authored her book, Tools of Terror, Light Weapons and India's Security. She was also consultant for the UN Non-Governmental Expert Group on Small Arms and Light Weapons, and a resource person for the National Defense College and the the Army War College, in addition to being a member of the Council of Security and Cooperation in the Asia Pacific and the Pugwash, India. Welcome, ma'am, and do please share your thoughts with us. Our third speaker for the day is Brigadier Romel Dhaya, who served as Deputy Director General at the IDSA from 2011 to 16. He is an Army veteran with extensive command and staff experience spanning over 3 decades, including as a military diplomat in strategic affairs and in counterinsurgency operations. He served as India's defense attaché to Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon, and with the Indian military training team in Bhutan. He also served in the Military Operations Directorate of the Indian Army and the Net Assessment Directorate of the Integrated General Defense Staff. Brigadier Dhaya is a graduate of the National Defense College and the Defense Services Staff College. He widely traveled and interacted with many global think tanks. And you would know that he was awarded the Sword of Honor and the Gold Medal at the Indian Military Academy, topped the course at the Defense Services Staff College. He was also awarded a Sena Medal for Distinguished Service Welcome, Brigadier Romel Dhaya. We look forward to hearing your views. Our moderator for this webinar is none other than a member of our core group, Lieutenant General Satish Dua, PVSM, UISM, SMVSM, who retired as the Chief of Integrated Defense Staff. A counter-terrorism specialist, General Dua was a corps commander in Kashmir during the tumultuous years of 2015-16, defined largely by the surgical strikes across a line of control. He's commanded his battalion as well as a brigade in active militancy in J&K on the line of control. As a Major General, he raised a new counterterrorism division of the Assam Rifles in the Northeast called IGAR East to coordinate operations in the 3 states of the Northeast. He was also a commando instructor as a captain and Indian defense attaché in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as a colonel. He has held many important appointments in Army headquarters. I will now hand over to General Dua for conducting the rest of the proceedings. The first speaker we'll have is Dr. Tara Kartha, followed by Brigadier Romel Dhaya, and Mr. G. Parsati would be the last. Over to you, Satish. Satish, you're on mute.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jai Hind, everybody. And thank you, General Murthy, for that a good start to the discussion. And thank you for introducing all the panelists. Before I begin, I think it is only right that I should congratulate General Murthy and his small team that he started with this Current Affairs Strategic Forum exactly 2 years to date. And as he's already described, this WhatsApp discussion group is fairly active. In fact, sometimes one goes a little out of breath trying to keep up with all the issues that are being discussed. So here is looking forward to one more webinar in the series to commemorate the 2nd anniversary of the Casa Forum today. We've already had one discussion called the Afghanistan Diaries Part 1 on 21st of last month. Now, ever since Taliban took over Kabul on 15th of August, the world has been watching the developments in Afghanistan very, very keenly. It is perhaps the most widely discussed topic in the world today, almost pushing COVID news to page 3. During the first discussion, or the first Afghanistan dialogue, as we called it, we discussed the ground situation, the role of various stakeholders, and India's options. Since then, a lot has happened. A couple of terror attacks have taken place. Precious lives have been lost, including those of American soldiers. However, the American evacuation it was completed with a day to spare, and transition to Taliban has been a default outcome. Yesterday, an interim government has been installed with several UN designated terrorists, 17 if I have my figures right, who form part of it. How should the world react to this? I am not going to make any more opening remarks because I stand between you and a very distinguished panel, as has been introduced by General Gautam Murthy. And I only want to limit myself to the remark to how we are going to lay out this webinar, that while Afghanistan is not a contiguous neighbor for India, it is separated only by a hostile Pakistan. Rather than act as a buffer, Pakistan is, rather than act as a buffer to insulate, Pakistan is likely to redirect the violence and virulence toward India. So we will restrict ourselves to the likely interplay between the terrorist groups and other stakeholders like the local warlords, etc., not only in Afghanistan, but in the region, and especially the role of Pakistan. Will there be any difference in the role that ISI is likely to play in the change dynamics? We are going to request, and we're going to hear from Dr. Tara Kartha on this. Thereafter, we'll request Brigadier Romel Dhaya to analyze how terrorist groups all over are likely to get encouraged by the success of Taliban. more on this later when he starts. And in the end, we will then request Mr. Parthasathi. We're very fortunate to have him here with us to talk about the evolving big picture after the power transition, if we can call it that. And also how the world community led by the United States in nation building, role of the United Nations, the UNSC, etc. We will then look forward to hearing from Mr. Parthasathi on that. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping rules. First, every panelist is requested to take 12 to 14 minutes. Madhavan, will you please use your rich baritone to caution the speakers about the time when a couple of minutes are left? This will leave us with over 30 minutes for the interactive session. And I will redirect the questions from the audience to the panelists. So before I hand over to Tara, I must apprise everyone that while she has been writing on the subject very frequently amongst other subjects, but her article, your article, Tara, of the day before in the print is most relevant. And I quote, "The alphabet soup of terrorists that an ill-governed Afghanistan can launch against India." And if anyone hasn't read it, it comes very highly recommended. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I probably won't take all of the 15 minutes, so that's one good news. So
Good.
Anyway, to start with, I think what General Murthy said in terms of, the new cabinet, we know is not at all encouraging. We don't know what on earth is going to go. Oh, by the way, if you can't hear me, just Mr. Shankar, could you just raise your hand if you can't hear me? Because my connection is bad. Yeah. So we've got the new, and most of us would have analyzed the new cabinet. And of course, the worst is the Interior Ministry, which is being headed by Sirajuddin Haqqani. And I expected that he would get the border and tribal affairs, which was what his father had, and which is very relevant to Pakistan. But this is definitely a step up and is very relevant to terrorism, because it's the Interior Ministry which looks at, which is supposed to look at terrorism in the country. You know that if you look at the organogram of the Afghanistan Interior Ministry, you will find it has a lot of power. It looks at counter narcotics. It has its own intelligence. It has a force of about 99,000, which I was very surprised. I didn't think it was so large. It has a counter narcotics division. I mean, imagine that. It is like asking the fox to guard the hen coop. So you've got Haqqani in charge of this ministry. So our first conclusion here is that he's not going to do anything very great. I mean, we cannot expect that he's going to pounce on terrorists left, right, and center unless they challenge the Taliban. That is the reservation as far as Haqqani is concerned. He will not like any group coming and, sort of upstaging the Taliban at any point. Or maybe they will cooperate, but I'll come to that eventually. If we look at UN reports, I mean, since you said this thing is to look at the interplay between groups and how that's going to pan out. We all know the ISI Haqqani connection. I don't think there's even any need to dwell on that. It is a given. Let's say that it is the most, if you analyze the attacks, it is the most capable organization. It has the best fighters. It has the best elite, what you call the red units. This is you can almost say it's like a commando force, within the Taliban. These are people who control what's going on in the military area. Now, if we look at the last, say, at least 6 years, who has the Taliban fought against inside Afghanistan is only the Islamic State Khorasan. That too, when I say Islamic State Khorasan, I'm referring to the ones who have apparently had this whole Raqqa connection, who have given bayat to the Syrian arm. Now, please remember, There are different modules of ISK. So don't assume it's one cohesive unit. It is not. So there are bits of ISK in the north, there's one in the east, and there's one in Kabul, and there are little ones here and there. You look at all the operations of Taliban is against in the north and in the east, where the ISK apparently is operating. Now, right now, even as we speak, there is definitely an Islamic State element still operating, not very large. No, not really. Syrian fighters are not coming running to Afghanistan.
Tara, we can't hear you. Tara, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, there was a bit of a disruption.
Just
for
the
a,
last 20
brief
seconds
minute.
of yours, but
Yeah.
YouTube is still
Yeah.
going live.
Now,
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
now we are live. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, so what we need to look at is the Islamic State Khorasan in Kabul, which is very different from the rest of its compatriots elsewhere. They all call themselves ISK. This group has, we don't know who it is. We don't know who leads it. We have very, very little information about this group. I'm sorry, I think have I gone off again?
No, we can
No,
keep
no,
hearing.
now we can hear you. Just go
Okay,
ahead.
so this group is able to, despite anything, is able to launch these huge attacks like the last airport one. The targets they select are also very strange. It is against Afghan ministers. It is against Indians like the Sikh, the ones against the Gurudwara, earlier Sikhs and Hindu procession in Kabul. Also remember the ISK claims everything. So you have to sift through and see which one is a credible ISK threat and which is not. So what emerges is that the ISK in Kabul seems to be very powerful, very capable, and able to command a large number of suicide bombers, explosives, etc. Whereas the ISK attacks in Nangarhar, Paktia, in the north are 2-bit small, very, very small attacks, which sometimes don't even get reported. So this is the difference. Now, recently, you would have heard a very strange interview from CNN of an ISK person in Kabul openly. He's not hidden. He's giving interviews in Kabul and saying, I've got Pakistanis, I've got Indians, I've got everybody. Now, here is a group which, according to the President Biden, is the sworn enemy of the Taliban. And he's sitting in Kabul openly giving an interview. So that's why I say there is an ISK in Kabul, which we need to evaluate very carefully. It is one threat. And the other threat is the ISL, normal Islamic State linked to Syria. That one is a threat to us, definitely, because it has a few, a bunch of Keralites. There are, if you remember, in recent days, the National Investigation Agency has arrested a group in Karnataka and in Kerala and a couple of, and including in Kashmir. It was a module where the women had gone to Syria. So you see, you have the Islamic State Syria connection also, so that is a separate one threat, and the other threat is this Kabul wala. My estimate is that the Kabul one ISK is nothing but the Haqqani network. So that is how we stand. So here we have one group. Now then you have the who else is the Taliban fighting in terms of terrorism? They're not fighting anybody. Right, you have a bunch of, you've got the Al-Qaeda, which is sitting very quietly in Afghanistan, and which the UN rapporteur says is very anxious not to create too much of noise and things like that, and is aligned, except in the middle of this year, Al-Qaeda chose to put out this public acknowledgement of its attacks, which it never does. That is unusual. So whenever in terrorism, the moment you see a blip, you have to analyze what it is. So why did Al-Qaeda, this was after the March, the agreement with the United States, the US is leaving, Al-Qaeda decides to lay claim to a bunch of attacks across Afghanistan. So there is a possibility that Al-Qaeda, which has always in the past been better funded, better resourced, and with better degree of cadres than the Taliban. They have educated, they've got people, they've got they had some very sophisticated cadres, may decide to come back into Afghanistan. And actually, Al-Qaeda means a base. So it might actually want to create a base in Afghanistan. Now we need to see whether Sirajuddin Haqqani will allow that or not, because my guess is probably not. But that depends. It's a very, very strong, but the probability is very shaky at present. We don't know. Then there are a bunch of other groups from Central Asian, the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which has been around for decades. Now here is another interesting thing. The IMU was once had good 2,000 plus cadres, and in over the last year or maybe year and a half, they have been virtually decimated. So there is advantage to being nice to the Taliban. Let's put it that way. So my assumption is somebody has approached the Taliban and told them to sort these guys out, and they have been sorted out by and large. That is the IMU. Curiously, though, the ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, and its associated partners are active in Badakhshan. Now, you'll notice that all these groups are active along the borders wherever they have a problem with, like Uzbeks along the Uzbek border, the ETIM along the Chinese border. Now you start looking at how the Taliban virtually took over the whole of Badakhshan and stabilized it. So now I am pretty sure the ETIM is not going to be able to operate in Badakhshan. So that is the second thing which we can, it's not a given, but that is what we see the trend as working, that if you're nice to the Taliban, they might just sort out some of your problems. And then of course you have a bunch of others, in terms of, there are these small groups which are operating, all of which I have at some time or the other been cooperating with the Haqqani network. That includes the Tehreek-e-Taliban, the groups. I mean, it's not one cohesive group, it's a bunch of groups which call themselves Tehreek-e-Taliban. They have certainly been involved in operations with Taliban. The Haqqanis come across as a kind of as a sort of a central node, which then gives out instructions, it's a very curious structure. And then on the other hand, you have the Tehreek-e-Taliban, which is attacking Pakistan. So the point is that I don't think a group remains TTP and wears a t-shirt saying TTP. He can be TTP today, he can be Lashkar tomorrow. Now, in that sense, please remember whatever happened to this Aslam Farooqi. I don't know how many of you all remember him. He was once head of the Islamic State. Earlier to that, he was in Lashkar-e-Taiba, and then he was put in prison, and then he disappeared. So that is a typical case of how things work out in Afghanistan. Aslam Farooqi, we were not allowed to interrogate him, though he was responsible for the Gurdwara attack. He was not sent to Pakistan either, though he's a Pakistani national. And he was not killed in the prison when the Taliban took over the prisons. He was not killed, but his predecessor was killed. So what I'm trying to say is we really can't say that A will remain ISIL or TTP or anything. He may change from anything to anything else. That is the kind of stuff which we're seeing.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you. You want to wrap up in a minute too?
Yeah. Last thing, I think I'm done. I think we look at the Kashmir issue. There are people here with far more knowledge than I have. Just one sentence is that Kashmir, in my experience, the groups there will not welcome Islamic State. They are being overshadowed by the Islamic State. And with the reservation that IS, when I say Islamic State, I'm still talking of a bunch of people who are technically probably far more savvy than the others. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Ma'am,
Thank you.
just one
Thank you
thing.
very much, Tara.
Sorry, General, do a quick one. Ma'am, while Brigadier
Yeah.
is going to be speaking, do you want to sign back and sign back in because your video has frozen?
Oh,
Who?
right.
Tara,
Thank
yeah.
you.
All right. Thank you for that, Maddie. Thank you very much, Tara. That was a very good alphabet, like your article said, the alphabet soup of the terrorists. And I'm sure you've not been able to cover all. There are so many other stakeholders that keep cropping up. But you made some very, very good, interesting points, especially when you spoke about Aslam Farooqi. You said how he jumped across groups. Well, they do have very different kind of linkages between the terror organizations, and they do have strange adversarial relationship as well. And like Tara just signed off on that note, saying that in Kashmir, in J&K, in Kashmir particularly, the ISK is not, I beg your pardon, IS is not very welcome. Now, there I totally agree with her, because while there have been an odd case here and there, somebody who's discovered who went away from there towards to join the IS, but let us also remember, in Kashmir specifically, maybe in other places as well, that the separatists in Kashmir, and if the IS tries to make inroads in Kashmir, they're looking at the same mass base to recruit from. So, and also their basic concepts are different. We are not looking at a caliphate kind of thing amongst the separatists in Kashmir. But more on that, I will leave it for the panelists. And shifting now towards the dynamics generated by this situation that can specifically impact not only Kashmir, and I'm sure Brigadier Dhaya will speak about this, it can impact whole of India. Kashmir more than others, and that we say also because last time round that Taliban was in power, during those years, Pakistan did use that period and the violence dynamics to redirect, to refocus, or to redirect the violence towards J&K, towards Kashmir. Does this also force some imperatives on us, especially in view of the dynamics in J&K as of the last 2 years after moderation of Article 370? For that and more, the floor is all yours, sir. Brigadier Romil Dahiya.
Thank you. Thank you, Satish.
Thank you, sir.
Let me first thank General Murthy and Casa for giving me this opportunity to share my views on the subject. And I congratulate Kasha on his second anniversary. I've been given 4 subtopics to speak on. One is the impact of Taliban takeover on the terrorist groups globally, impact on the Indian youth, and particularly in J&K, whether we'll have more number of youth joining militancy. Third is the likelihood of surplus terrorists being redirected toward J&K. And the fourth one is our options. Now, coming back to the first one, impact of Taliban takeover on global jihad on other terrorist groups. Now, we can take this from how people have reacted. Now, we know that Al-Shahab in Somalia celebrated it by distributing sweets. In Yemen, contesting groups belonging to both Sunni and Shia persuasions celebrated this with gunfire throughout the night. Al-Ahrar, Jabhat al-Nusra, etc. from Idlib celebrated it. And speakers, particularly the religious scholars, one, for example, that comes to mind is the one who spoke in a mosque in Jerusalem, who congratulated Taliban and said that they have been an exemplar for the Ummah. And he then also, interestingly, suggested that they should take on Pakistani government, remove them from the job, and then come to Jerusalem to liberate Jerusalem. The Egyptian scholar living in Istanbul, spoke very strongly in favor of this, Ummah rising in revolt and making use of this victory of Taliban or America. But when we see all this, we also see that the major effort of congratulating Taliban and gloating over the success is directed against America. They have, almost all speakers have, spoken about humiliation of America. And I think that's the common theme running through all their comments, which also, of course, has been spoken about by the Chinese media, by Chinese spokespersons. Russians have shown their happiness. Iran has shown its happiness. And Iran, interestingly, in any case, has, after having seen America being humiliated and going out, will probably change its stance toward Taliban. Previously, they wanted them to get out. And now, once they have got out, now they come back to more realistic kind of a position, and they'll have to start looking after their interests there. Now, that was one part as to how people have reacted. But more importantly, when we analyze it, we see that the exemplar effect, the kind of morale boosting effect that it has on all terror groups everywhere. Strong message that has been conveyed is that a faith-based organization which has strategic patience and which can persist despite losses here and there will ultimately succeed. And that they have defeated not just one superpower, but the second superpower as well. And that if the Ummah can join hands together and follow in a particular path, the Ummah will always succeed. Now, this is an extremely strong message, which in fact has the potential of rejuvenating even those terrorist groups which are presently not doing well, which are presently sort of suffering military defeat or something like that. They can lie low. Now, the most serious impact of that is going to be on Al-Qaeda, because Al-Qaeda for the last couple of years, except in small places like Mali, etc., what they have been trying to do is to build their cadres silently, quietly, keeping them ideologically strong, but refraining from carry out any major operation. This is a major danger, because even people in the Indian subcontinent, particularly in India and some states, in Hyderabad, in West Bengal, in UP, in Kerala, for example, who may be lying as sleeper cells presently, they can be activated at a given time. Particularly Al-Qaeda, since they have been in cahoots with Taliban, and they have very strongly come out with their statement also very strongly come out in support of Taliban victory. Surprisingly, of course, leaving out Chechnya and Xinjiang, but mentioning Kashmir, mentioning Levant, mentioning other places, which shows that they have the designs. But at the same time, they are also being guided by Pakistan, because Pakistan did not want to annoy Russia and China at this stage. So this shows ISI control over Taliban and over Al-Qaeda. So this is another problem that is taking place. Now, the transnational organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS have this potential to cause harm. Most interestingly, ISK, Islamic State Khorasan, joined in congratulating defeat of America, so with a left-handed compliment to Taliban. But of course, they gave prominence to the bomb blast that took place at Kabul airport, and saying in terms of giving the last kick to the imperialists and to the Western, hegemony and things like this. And they have in fact said that all of us, all groups from the Ummah, must therefore get after the Western interest and defeat them. Interestingly, even Hezbollah Secretary General Nasrallah also made a statement and showed this as defeat of Western countries rather than showing this as a victory for Taliban, of course. But undoubtedly, the psychological advantage that accrues to all these groups everywhere, including the groups operating against India and within India, is going to be phenomenal. It is undeniable. It's bound to be there. These groups have now, as we also see, the LET, the JEM founder, Azhar Masood Azhar, went to Kandahar to meet Taliban leadership to ask for their help in liberating J&K. Even Shaheen, the spokesperson, assistant spokesperson, he also said that we have a right to raise our voice in favor of Kashmiris. Let's also see as to what is what is the position of Taliban vis-a-vis India. Lately, they have tried to project an image of moderate sort of a outfit. They have also said that we want good relations with India. Obviously, they have certain limitations at the moment. If India has a good image amongst the Afghan population, they would of course not like to annoy that population at this stage. They also know that they would probably need investments from India. They would need food from India because of the dire, situation of drought and hunger that's prevailing over there. And of course, they would the situation with regard to their finances, where there is a run on the bank, and all their money that was available to them is frozen for the moment. So they cannot probably annoy India. They've also made peace with. They've also tried to make peace and buy some kind of legitimacy from Iran, Russia, and China by promising to them that they will not let their the groups which are working against the terrorist groups working against these countries to operate from this soil, shelter there, or to get any aid from Taliban. So they've said that. But he said that Taliban is not a monolith. We have Haqqani, like Dr. Tara Kartha had spoken about, most dangerous kind of an outfit. So they are there. Al-Qaeda is there. In addition to that, LET and JEM have been operating from Afghanistan. LET, in any case, as you know, its birthplace was Kunar in Afghanistan. Even now, large number of LET cadres and JEM cadres have been supporting Taliban in this whirlwind that took place recently. So obviously, these people, the minimum that you can expect, even if Taliban do not openly or covertly support these groups, they will at least give them shelter. And if they don't give it, the 6 governorates that have gone officially to Haqqani, these 6 governorates in the east will definitely will provide space for both JEM and LET and any other group that IASI desires to train over there and to deny some kind of to provide some kind of a deniability to Pakistan, considering the world is focused on world will be more focused on Pakistan now, since Pakistan has lost some leverage, as many countries can talk directly to Afghanistan hereafter. Okay, coming to the second part, impact on the Indian youth and particularly in J&K to join militancy. The first part, of course, is the impact of sleeper cells, which are influenced by either IS or by Al-Qaeda. They will be emboldened. They'll have more josh, as they say. They will have more faith in the path they've taken. And therefore, one can always expect some kind of problem now emerging. There might be some terrorist attacks in some parts of India. There might be greater sort of a mobilization, social mobilization of these groups. There might be greater interaction on social media and using secret sort of channels like Telegram, etc. And so one will have to be careful. As far as Kashmir is concerned, we must now go back to the time when Taliban were in power in Afghanistan last time. When they were there, Kandahar happened. When they were in power, Kargil happened, although I don't say that they participated in Kargil.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. Do you want to take a minute to wrap up? Thank you.
Fine. Now, but at the same time, we know that Gulbuddin Haqmatiar's one of his important persons, Akbar Bhai, who operated in Sopore in 93 to 95, and he was a battle hardened, and he created lots of problems for us there. Mustgul came from Peshawar as well that way. So what is going to happen is that a large number of battle hardened cadres of JEM, LET, and rebranded terrorists of any group will make an attempt to enter Jammu and Kashmir. With them, they will bring more sophisticated weapons which are available to the Afghani group, for example, out of the American stocks. More expertise for IEDs, improvised explosive devices, those will also be coming in. So we need to be very, very careful. Now, what impact it will have is those who are taking part in counterinsurgency operations would understand that people at large, try and favor the side which is winning. And if the terrorists can carry out some successful major operations in Jammu and Kashmir, there'll obviously be a larger number of youth trying to join militant groups over there. And secondly, since the local militants, senior cadres of the local militants have been eliminated over the last 1 year or so, the hardened criminals, hardened terrorists coming from Pakistan side will definitely provide leadership to these even local cadres over here. The only thing that I need to say is this, before I wrap up, is this, that we have very limited options besides being vigilant, not only to maintain a vigil on social media for terrorist groups emerging in other parts of the country, but not letting the people come in. So they might try to come in with larger strength, with larger number of weapons. They might drop weapons through weapon caches through drones, etc. But they will come as only those people can come whom we can let them come in. So we have to make sure that they don't come in. Besides using diplomatic and other leverages against Taliban to make sure that they don't do any khurafat, we must be cautious about Haqqani and other groups still trying to make trouble in India. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, on that. Now, I'd like to ask you a question on your last sentence, but please take it up or comment on this after in the interactive session. My take on this is, I mean, a point of view that I want to put across is that last time around when Taliban was in power, the situation in Jammu and Kashmir was very different from what it is now. Then our army was very thin on ground because we had just started to grapple with this problem in Kashmir, which is now 3 decades old. From then to now, we have raised a counter-terrorism force, 63 battalion strong. We have an LC funds with sensors and enablers. And we have a very robust counter-infiltration and a counter-terrorism grid in place. So just by the kinetics of it, we are in a much better position than we were 3 decades ago. So having made that point, also the fact that in light of Article 370 dilution of Article 370 2 years ago, whatever, now I'm talking of the aspect of encouragement to the youth to join or they getting motivated to join militancy because of this Taliban takeover there, which you said correctly is bound to happen all over the world. But what does then it force us to do, goad us or guide us to have, to actually try and whatever we're trying to do in the last 2 years, we need to hurry that up. We need to make sure that we ensure that less of youth get goaded or motivated to join militancy. I'll ask for your comment on this in the interaction, sir. Let me just move on to Mr. Parthasathi. Sir, we are very fortunate to have you here. We're looking forward to listening to your views, especially on the big picture. Today, the UNSC says that their resolution reads that they demand that Afghan territory not be used to threaten or attack any country or to shelter, train terrorists or plan or finance any terrorist acts, unquote. Now, but this has, and this resolution specifically mentions groups like LET and JEM. Financial aid from West remains frozen. Their own foreign exchange reserves of $9 billion or thereabouts also are frozen. But on the other hand, General Mark Milley, the chairman of Joint Chief of Staff of the US, has said that they might cooperate with Taliban against the ISK. The NSA of the USA and Russia, their visit to Delhi and many more such connected events around the world actually show us that all concerned are working overtime to grapple with the consequences of how this Taliban takeover can impact them. We look forward to hearing your views, sir, to walk us through the larger picture. Over to one of the doyens of India's diplomatic corps, Mr. G. Parthasarathy. All yours, sir.
Thank you, General Dua, and to the hosts for having me here. Pakistan is something which has been a part of my psyche since my days in the army. This is being held in Pune, and I was commissioned in Pune in 1963 as from a technical corps, being an engineer. I faced them up in 65. They were well armed, well disciplined, and I've always regarded the Pakistan military as a disciplined source functioning under a change of command. Never underestimate them is one bit of thing I learned. They have lots of choices, lots of crowds. If you talk to a person like General Asad Durrani, it would be quite different from what people who are otherwise ISI chiefs talk. So you're dealing with a diverse population, and please believe me, the hatred for India is predominantly Punjabi. You have political space in the frontier where there are serious difficulties. The rise of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the calling into question of the Durand Line is a factor we have to bear in mind and take advantage of. Because not even the Taliban will concede the Durand Line to the Pakistanis. So one thing about diplomacy is don't be too defensive about it. Secondly, as I said, talking to different people in the Pakistan army, like everybody, there are people with different views, but they're intent on one thing, everyone, avenging in some form or the other 1971. And that rankles in dealing with them. The present situation, as I see it, Imran Khan, the Prime Minister, I first met him in 1982 with Gavaskar and the Indian team when I was in Karachi. And what I was told by a Pakistani correspondent who was a good friend at that time, when I asked him, why does Imran bowl with so much fire against India? I didn't see it when he was playing England or West Indies. The answer was that Imran had said, this is 1982, whenever I play against India, I do not treat it as a game. I think of Kashmir and treat it as a jihad. That is the present political dispensation, and if this process goes through well, the army will see he's re-elected. Otherwise, he's set to fail. That is the political ambience. So what is happening is important. The other point is General Bajwa. Unlike other generals, he is very quiet. He doesn't talk very much, but his use of the ISI has been devastating. And he thinks pretty carefully, not pushing the politician to a corner. He plays the cards very quietly. If you see the comparison between him and Rahil Sharif, who was a motor mouth, and God save the Saudis, he's working with them. There is these differences. As you would have, say, between Hamid Gul and Durrani as heads of the ISI. But never forget their ultimate aim in their mind, institutionally as an army, is revenge for 1971 in whatever form they can take it, whenever they can take it. What is the circumstances we are functioning under? A disgraceful defeat for the Americans. I think worse than Vietnam, because there they left with some dignity and were left to deal with Vietnam, which is now one of their best friends. This one is hardcore Islamists who are not going to be their friends. And the very thought of someone who's not one of them, and you know what I mean, being the top of the house, is something they will resent. And this whole exercise, I think we must give credit. The ISI brilliantly executed it. They had, carried out a careful survey, obviously, of the Afghan army's weaknesses, its unwillingness to fight, and its poor leadership. That is what led to the fiasco. Added to that was Joe Biden. Now, I want to say about Joe Biden. You had before him Bush, Obama, and even Trump, all three India friendly. If you ask me about Biden, the answer is no. I will never forget during his last visit as vice president to Pakistan, he ran all the way, not exactly run, but went in a government car, all the way from Islamabad to Rawalpindi to call on General Kayani. It was a disgrace for a vice president to do that, but he did it. Now, when sizing up Biden, I always tell my over-enthusiastic friends with great love and affection from our India, for the US, be careful of this man. We could deal with Bush, we could deal with later on with Trump, which was a great feat. And hats off to Mr. Modi and the organizers of that great function in Texas. So I think these are basic factors. I do not expect really any thanks or from the president, but we are fortunate in many ways in dealing with the United States that we have a Secretary of State, a Secretary of the National Security Advisor, and the CIA Chief, all three very India friendly. But if you ask me whether push comes to shove, Biden will say, I love you, India, do anything for us, forget it. It's not going to happen. They will arm us, but charge us. And therefore, I firmly believe, stand firm with them at this time, despite our differences with the Russians on getting the S-400, more as a political point than anything else. But to be seen in the world as somebody standing on your feet, that is important. A lot of leftist opposition to the Quad, but what else do we do? You are dealing with China, which is a substantive power. And don't forget, Pakistan is the closest ally that China has anywhere in the world. Nowhere in the world has one country transferred to another designs for nuclear weapons and long-range missiles the way China has done for Pakistan. Anybody who studies the Pakistan missile and nuclear program, even the designs of their nuclear weapons, luckily they both had enriched uranium, went that way. So if you ask me what are the challenges we face, a not too friendly administration in the US, but a friendly Congress and officials. I think that with that we can manage as long as we manage our diplomacy carefully. Because as I see it, this is what has happened, has charged up the Pakistanis, the army and the ISI. They have actually see it as having first defeated the Soviet Union and now defeating the United States. Their morale is flying very high. And I do not expect them to be adventurous. Not Bajwa. He's not a Musharraf who experiments with exercises which don't work out. And we will have to face this challenge. About Haqqani, about this, as it is, the whole cabinet, 5 of them have been declared as international terrorists, led by no less than the Prime Minister, who was declared by the United Nations as a terrorist. So I think these are the things we have to play and pressurize. But also, I think the General, you left pointed out the difficult economic conditions. Now, I've made 5 visits to Afghanistan, met everyone from Karzai downwards. They appreciate India. That for 20 years we did nothing and asked nothing in return. We did it out and asked nothing in return. And we have to utilize that. And therefore, any people who say boycott them, don't talk to them, no. Find ways to be in touch with them. Because they will find, despite the Russian support, which is not going to be too strong, and the Chinese, the way they are going and the people they are appointing, the whole cabinet is a farce. They won't be able to run the country. So, General, is my time running over? No. So I think this is a fact we have to bear in mind. We are well placed diplomatically. You're going to have China put pressure on you on the border, but that's something we have been able to manage. And just remember one thing: last year's exercise proved we could stand up to the Chinese, to the world, which has not been the case before, though we have done well. So I think there is a perceptual change about India's capabilities. But as I said, I would still, with Afghanistan, think about continuing economic assistance. You know, the greatest impact came from midday meals for school children.
Sorry to interrupt,
We'll have to
Ambassador.
act.
If you want to wrap up
Thank
in a
you.
minute. No, go ahead.
Yeah, in a minute.
Sure.
In a minute. In a minute, faced with a challenge, we've dealt with stronger challenges. There are shortcomings, weaknesses with our adversaries. Frankly, the Russians are, pretty hard, heated up about the way the Chinese are dominating everything. Putin has his pleasures. So playing also the Russian card, the Russian angle, has its advantages in defense and other terms. And I will close by saying that I expect infiltration to pick up after the winter season, because by then they would be prepared. And I'm sure we'll know how to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That was it was really insightful to hear your views. You made some excellent points over there, sir. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to sort of highlight any specific points that you did make, but I just want to leave that one very intangible thought that you left. I'd like to repeat that. You said they appreciate India. For 20 years, we did whatever we wanted to do. We provided aid and etc., but we did not ask for anything. And the previous speaker also said that they need India because they would not like to displease the Afghan population, Brigadier Daya said, because the population, we have a nice people-to-people connect. And on more practical terms, I think they would also like to seek some aid, especially food grains from India. So here's hoping that we continue to let that connect stay alive for whatever it is worth. And as it is, it's a cauldron. Things have to settle, and let's see how we go ahead with that. Thank you, sir, once again for an excellent, insightful address. So questions. I will, as the questions keep getting fed to me in the chat, I will request first, Brigadier Daya, if you can very crisply come on to comment on the issue that we spoke of.
Well, you see, there's no doubt about it that India of 2021 is not India of 90s. Yes. We have a very strong grid, a contingency grid, and we also have good sensors on the fence, and fence is well guarded. But despite that, having said that, Pulwama happened. Despite that, some important, some big infiltrations have taken place. Recent intelligence reports have suggested that 4 or 5 groups have come in last month and a half, 2 months, and very well armed. We also know that drones are now being used to drop weapons closer to the LC, from where the supporters of the terrorists or terrorists themselves go and pick up. And weapons are in short supply with the terrorists presently, and now more sophisticated weapons will be available. Let me draw your attention here to one more thing, that besides all the celebrations that various terrorist groups have been doing everywhere, the most unadulterated joy that has been displayed is displayed by the Pakistani politicians all across. That they're going to pay for it subsequently is a different issue. That the world must have also taken note of it is a different issue. And that gives us an opportunity to say that anything that happens across the LC, despite the border, despite the hostile border, now, I mean, we just have about 400 kilometers from LC to Kabul, for example. But despite that, no human being or no weapon can reach India from 400 kilometers. No fire can come from 400 kilometers. All that comes in has to come from Pakistan. So if you hold the Pakistanis' feet to fire, if you make them responsible for any mischief they do, is Pakistan's doing, and then punish them accordingly where required, then I think we would have achieved our aim. But of course, 100% guarding of border is also not possible. US co-commander would know that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm going to take a few questions now. The next question, the question now coming up, I'm sorry, I do not have the names in the chat box as to who's asked this question. The question, I'm reading out the question. The question is, Afghanistan is both an area of interest and area of influence for Delhi. What have we done since the time USA started actively planning to pull out to safeguard our interests? Mr. Pathasati, I'm going to come to you with this question. Afghanistan is both an area of interest and area of influence for India. What have we done since the time USA started actively planning to pull out to safeguard our interests, or have we been content to leave it at the mercy of Pakistan?
Well, you know, these are early days, but the
Yes.
most interesting news I read in recent days was that during these days, we have had on the same day the Russian spook chief and the American spook chief from the CIA. So if you have the chiefs of intelligence of both the United States and the Russians together, I think coincidentally on the same date virtually, you are now dealing at the highest level with intelligence exchanges to our benefit. And knowing Ajit, who was with me in Islamabad many years ago, they don't do those things without serious thought. So as long as we'll have now to see how we can push this at the UN and other international forums. But more importantly, what can we receive by way of timely intelligence of which way things are going? I think that these visits will institutionalize that. More importantly, the PM is headed for Washington. Mr. Biden behaves like a shy bride when it comes to meeting him. But the fact of the matter is that if it would be good to have a one-on-one with the president and to talk to him. Right now we're seeing differences between the Europeans and the US on this whole withdrawal, but that will ease eventually. So I think diplomacy is, as I see it, with these countries of interest are very important. And then the other aspect of it is the huge concerns which have arisen in Tajikistan mostly and in other neighbors, with the exception of Uzbekistan, which enjoys the patronage of Turkey, which in turn is very friendly with Pakistanis and the others. So the Uzbeks seem more relaxed than the others. But we will have to be in touch with them. let's not forget the last time around when we had, again, Iran is now deeply concerned. They don't like this push against their, which is going to engulf the Hazaras, which they will intervene if that happens. You can't rule that out. The Iranians and the Tajiks together make a good combination for us, at least, to get the goods we wanted on the other side, logistically. So, and that has worked in the past. So let us see how all this plays out. I'm certain all this is being looked to.
If I can, if I can interrupt a bit, sir, I want to add on to a comment to what you spoke about Iran, and then seek your views. Yeah. So, as per some reports, Iran has been demanding an inquiry into the role of Pakistan, and this is one of the questions, also a part of the question that I'm reading out into the Panjshir episode. Will there be a situation where Iran, you think, would like to intervene on behalf of the Shia community? You see, whatever is the dynamics today, it's all, as you spoke and other speakers spoke, other panelists spoke, is that all groups in some form or the other, all terrorist groups and other stakeholders are sort of jubilant about the fact that the West has been defeated. And I say it openly to say that by extension, the Christianity, is Islam versus Christianity sort of a thing. But now the fault lines will emerge, have started emerging. So do you see a situation where Iran taking up cudgels on behalf of the Shia community?
Absolutely. They have said they will do so by no less than the president. If the Hazaras are hurt, the Iranians will respond very strongly. And that will put the Russians and Chinese in a bind, because the Chinese have got a couple of $100 billion worth of projects lined up in Iran. And the Russians have always courted the Iranians quite carefully, the revolutionary government. And they're not going to lose them. So I think the message would have gone, lay off the Hazaras, do what you want. And then they can also not act against down south, the Uzbeks. So because of the connections with the Turks. So I think let's wait and see how all this plays out. But in the meantime, I would suggest, it would be my very strong recommendation. Don't go through the UN. Go directly when they are going to feel the food pinch, which will be in another 2 months from now. Keep your ships ready. Don't send it via Pakistan, which they will insist. Send it via Iran. They can't refuse it.
Very good point, sir. That is really a very good point. And we've been speaking about how we can sort of wait in the wings to act when we have to act. And again, like you made that point, we may do that and not yet not want to demand something in exchange upfront. I think building goodwill is far more important. Thank you, sir, for that intervention. Now, the next question I will like to read direct towards Tara. And the question for you is how, this is from Brigadier C. Sandeep Kumar Nair. How will Pakistan deal with the Durand Line issue? How will be the interfaction disagreement develop over the period of time, maybe an year ahead from now?
If I can just take a minute, on this, how India has dealt with this Taliban, what we should do, please remember, we signed an agreement in November to provide aid to the 80 million in aid. You knew the Taliban were coming and you still went ahead with that agreement. That should give you a pointer as to what we are looking at. And number two is this provision of food aid is what I'd also suggested in an article. An Afghan never forgets a grievance, but he also never forgets a friend. So I agree 100% with Ambassador Parthasarathy. If possible, we have to be there with aid, medical assistance, whatever it is, just give it and walk away. So that's just part of it. On Iran, by the way, most of you all will remember that when their embassy was attacked in Pakistan, they arrived with 60,000 force on the border. Iranians are not going to take anything lying down. And for nearly a long time thereafter, sorry, not in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, my mistake.
Afghanistan.
They were, so for ages afterwards, their interests were more or less okay, you know, so the Iranians know how to play this game, but they also somebody attacked Salma Dam. That was recently. So we have tensions with Iran on that Salman Dam. It's not an India-Iran thing. It is more a question of water, provision of water from within Afghanistan. So that also you have to take on board. Durand Line, there is when I was in Washington, there is a very strong lobby pushing for Afghanistan to recognize the Durand Line and be done with it. You know, so there is the ones who, you know, people in Afghans can talk one way to you and tell you what you want to hear. You know, so there is a lot of people saying, let's recognize the Durand Line and be done with it. But a Taliban government which does that now is going to be stamped with Made in Pakistan label, and they know it. So it's going to be very, very difficult. My guess is the pressure will come from Washington itself for them to recognize the Durand Line. I mean, this is how this mix of things works. On one point, very quickly, you know, when you say Indians are loved in Afghanistan, yes, that's true. But what I hear, this narrative, which I really want to bring to the attention of this group in particular, the narrative is that India-Pakistan proxy war has ruined Afghanistan. We have to fight this narrative. I mean, I've told at so many forums that you've got a 60,000 Taliban force which Pakistan is supporting. I said, show me even 2,000 which we are supporting. Forget the 60,000. It isn't there. But this narrative is very, very strong. And I think we need to watch out for that. I'll stop there.
General Dua.
Thank you.
If I can just suggest, maybe if Brigadier Dahiya responds, then you could take that other question in the chat box to Ambassador Parthasarathi, because he said he needs to leave at 7:30.
I can stay
And
for
we
another
can
10
still continue with Dr. Kartha and Brigadier Dahiya after Ambassador leaves in.
So Mr. Parthasarathi just said that he can continue for another 10 minutes. And so we'll, the next question I have for Mr. Parthasarathi. Our belief in our soft power in Afghanistan may be overstated. Now, you see, I'm just going to give you a view. This is a view from Mr. Sunil Pant, who's essentially an economist. He's worked in Afghanistan and he knows hands-on. So I think it's interesting to hear that view as well. So let me just finish the question. Our belief in our soft power in Afghanistan may be overstated. Turkish TV serials, fashion trends, alternate residences of influential Afghans, etc., present a contrary picture. There were anti-India demonstrations against the CAA. Do you think that soft power has meaningful value if it comes to a crunch? A very quick comment, I mean, we cannot get into a difference of opinion.
You see, soft power is never meant to immediately take effect. Soft power is inducing of certain feelings. And everyone I've met and spoken to, and everybody from Karzai onwards, this thing that we asked nothing in return for what we did, particularly on the school children aid and so on. And the fact is that the Salma Dam we built is maybe unpopular in places like Iran, but that has always been a difference over river waters. But it has served us well, that unlike the Americans, we didn't make a fuss about what we were doing. We did it quietly. And don't forget the hundreds of people who were trained every year in things like information technology to meteorology. These things I found even when I was in Africa leave a lasting impact, because the person you give it will be the most unexpected guy who rises very high. So I give it a chance because the costs what? I mean, you're giving them maybe 500,000 or 1 million tons of food grains over a period of a year. That's more than easily available in our reserve stocks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, there is a question, Mr. Parthasarathi, for you by name. So I am going to read that out from Raghavendran Radhakrishnan. Mr. Pathasati sir, great insights. Do you think we will have more ties bond along with Russia again to counter any possible adversity? And I'm going to bundle another quick question, another small question along with it by another participant. Would Pakistan continue to block India's trade with Afghanistan now that Afghanistan needs it? Mr. Pathasati sir. Mr. Pathasati, can you hear me?
I think it's frozen.
Okay, I think we've lost Mr.
Yeah, he's there
Pathasati.
now.
He's
Ask
there?
him again.
All right. Mr. Pathasati, can you hear me? Sir?
He's muted. He's muted.
Sir, you are muted, it seems.
All right, yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sir, could you hear my questions?
No, that question now, there was an electricity problem.
All right. So they are very small, quick questions, and I'll repeat them. One from Mr. Raghvendra Radhakrishnan saying, Ambassador Pathasati, sir, great insights. Do you think we will have more ties bond along with Russia again to counter any possible adversity? Maybe it's a bit of a chat.
Yeah.
I'm just reading it out. And a second question by another participant, Mr. Krishnan, is, would Pakistan continue to block India's trade with Afghanistan now that Afghanistan needs it?
Firstly, on the first question was on, I'll answer the second first. Would Afghanistan block it? Yes. But the fact of the matter is that we use the Chabahar route.
Yes.
That's precisely why we built Chabahar. And the Iranians would be delighted to get the Afghans to feel guilty, or welcome what they've done. So I think that's a win-win for us, and we can do it. By Chabahar, the road exists. And I think food grains, nobody will dare to stop, not even the Pakistanis, because that is something everybody needs. And the second question?
Russia.
About Russia, sir, bonding with Russia.
Well, I think, I'm one of those, I think perhaps the last person alive with the Indian delegation which negotiated the Indo-Soviet Treaty. So you're talking to a guy with very, very fond memories and, who really likes the Russians for all their faults. I think you should not lose a friend. They have stood by us. They have stood by Chinese criticisms of the S-400. And we've told the Americans to go and climb up a tree when they asked us not to take it. So I think that is the way you have to run this relationship. It stands on its own because all said and done, the Russian can never love a Chinese.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in their blood.
Absolutely.
So,
well put, sir. That is well said.
And
You make a very good point, sir, whether it is Russia now, and we spoke about, people to people connect with Afghanistan. Today is an era of multilateral engagements, multiple engagements. And wherever we have goodwill, at whatever level, we must continue to retain that. So thank you very much, sir. I'm going to direct my next question to Brigadier Dahiya. China is warming up. This is from Giri, and I cannot read the rest of the name because it gets abridged there. China is warming up to the Taliban to make inroads into Afghanistan. Will China use PLA for reconstruction of the country?
I think, okay, it's a good question. But the thing is this, that there are many irreconcilables in this proposition. First irreconcilable is that if Taliban USP is to throw out foreign troops from Afghan soil, and that is the reason they are trying for them to occupy Afghanistan, they cannot permit troops from any other country to come in. That is number one. Second, as far as China is concerned, please understand that it is one thing to welcome Americans going. Before the Americans went, of course. After the Americans went, they said, this is not the way to leave. Because in their hearts of hearts, they wanted America to continue and continue bleeding. But when Americans left, the Chinese understood the problem that challenges that Afghan offered to them, that they will have to be part of the management of that problem. And management of that problem is huge. One, ITEM is not something that can be discarded overnight, because ITM has literally taken over Badakhshan and helped in taking over border areas of other provinces. ITM has been extremely useful to Taliban. You should remember, they refused to give up Osama bin Laden because they said it goes against Afghan ethics of handing over your guest to somebody else. Here, there is some group which has helped Taliban. And so Taliban is unlikely to be giving it to China, irrespective of what China gives them, promises to give them. That's number one. Secondly, China has never given anything for free to anybody. And even in this case, they are not likely to give. People talk glibly about 2 trillion worth of minerals lying under Afghan soil and huge quantity of rare earths and things of this nature. All these need extraction. After all, these things have been known for the last 20, 30 years, and not an ounce has come out. You need stability. You need a good tax regime. You need what taxes, what levies to give to whom. Here, everybody would be extracting. The warlords would be doing it, who would emerge very soon. The disgruntled Taliban soldiers who may not get their pay in time, they will be extracting. There'll be unauthorized toll booths everywhere. People will come and kidnap some Chinese over there in the mine and ask for ransoms and all. So it's not easy. And where do they take it from? The Iranians will ask them for something if they want to take it via Chabahar. Pakistanis are not going to be kind to them, and they're going to freeze them if they use Gwadar or Pasni port or Karachi port for that matter. So therefore, I would suggest that neither the Chinese PLA can come in the way Chinese PLA has come into Gilgit-Baltistan. It's not likely to come, nor is Taliban going to give away IETM. So therefore, when Chinese appear cautious, their spokespersons, or including Wang Yi, their foreign minister, when they appear cautious in relationship with Taliban and recognition of Taliban, there are real irreconcilable differences. Like Mr. Parthasarathi said, the Russians cannot love China. The Afghans also, for various reasons, can't love China. And leaving out Uyghurs in the cold, not making a comment today, tomorrow, day after, is not going to sit pretty with the Ummah as far as Taliban's image is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for a very deliberate answer on that one. And I think we have time only for a very, very quick comment, and I will give that honor to Mr. Parthasarathi. And it's a rejoinder sort of on the question that Brigadier Dahiya dealt with in the end, and saying that I'm abridging the question that is there, Chinese will try to play up to Afghanistan government no matter who and bleed them of their wealth. Will the next power who bites the dust in grave, will it be the next power who bites the dust in the graveyard of empires? The question being asked here essentially is that as China comes in, for whether it is for reconstruction or like Brigadier Dahiya brought out in great detail as to what the dynamics can be, a quick comment, sir. Is China also walking into a minefield?
Muted.
Mr.
No aid,
Parthasarathi, I think you are...
no aid anywhere in the world is charity. They give it for a particular reason. The Chinese have done it rather very crudely. Everything for construction. Why? Because they built all the buildings they want, all the bridges they want, and you've got hundreds of thousands of workers left without jobs. So what do? You bring out a great plan and take it across the world, of connectivity. What does it do? It gives people a false sense of prosperity. It provides no immediate relief. And more importantly, it lands them in a debt trap. At least 2 or 3 countries have had to mortgage, including Sri Lanka and some of the East Africans, have had to mortgage territory to pay the Chinese debt. Hambantota is today in Chinese control. Now, you have to play that on the minds of people about the Chinese debt trap diplomacy. And you have to work with every power which can join you in that, because that's a real problem. Land people in a debt trap and then do what you want in that country. Classical example, Sri Lanka. Next example is going to be Pakistan. Watch out for China. In case of Afghanistan, they'll be different. Afghanistan has the finest rare earths in the world and a lot of other mineral resources. The Chinese are very, very greedy for natural resources. And therefore, they will make the bid, and let them give it a try and see that it fails.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And I have only
General
time for a
Dua,
very
can I just interrupt and ask a quick question? I'll break it up into 2 parts. One, the military part of it and the geopolitical. The military part, possibly for Tara and Brigadier Dahiya, it came up in our core group also. What's the impact of what's happened in Afghanistan on the LC border with Pakistan, given that Pakistan has just activated a couple of their rarely used air bases along the LC, and there is word about a lot of launch pads being activated. And the geopolitical part is possibly for Ambassador Partha Sarthi. Given India signed a ceasefire agreement in February and about a week later, the Chinese signed the Pangang So withdrawal deal, was it something that China and Pakistan played well in advance in anticipation of what's happened in Afghanistan to hold India back, especially given the CIA chief was in Delhi yesterday and the Russian chief was in Delhi today? Brigadier Dahiya, you want to go first and then Ambassador Partha?
All right. All right. Like I said before, Pakistan is going to try the hardest that it can to pump in more battle-hardened, better equipped with American weapons this time, night vision devices, and not only just the normal fighters, but also IED experts and communication experts. They will try and send more of them across the line of control. They are going to activate the launch pads. The modus operandi may be slightly different. That previously the training camps were, let us say, differed from 20 kilometers to 50 kilometers to 100 kilometers behind the LC, but the launch pads were closer, 4, 5 kilometers, 6 kilometers, or sometimes 2 kilometers. This time what might happen is that the training camps might move to eastern Afghanistan to leave a smaller footprint. However, the troops might, the Mujahideen, the so-called Mujahideen, the terrorists might come straight from there, transported straight from there to the launch pads and launch straightway, with weapon caches provided to them up front over there, so that they are unrecognizable and it's deniable. This will happen. We are bound to see more attempts at manufacturing and then deploying IEDs. So we have to be extremely careful. Our troops going out for operations and the road opening parties, etc., will have to be extremely careful. We have also got to be a little more careful across the LC. Like I said, they may try their hardest, but the number of people who are going to come in are those whom we are going to let them come in. So we must stop that.
So we could expect a spectacular event.
Just give me 30 seconds on Doon line. You see, with Haqqani being given 6 eastern sort of provinces, Doon line figuratively had shifted west already. So there's going to be no problem from his side. However, this is a very strong point for us going forward to be exploited when required, because the Pashtuns, the government is of Pashtuns, for Pashtuns and by Pashtuns in the interim government that has been announced over there. And for them to leave out Doon lines, or when confronted to say that, okay, Doon line doesn't matter at all to us and all that, is going to be impossible. And that is going to be a friction point between Haqqanis and the Kandhari Pashtuns. And that is something that we need to really be telling the Kandhari Pashtuns that Durand line is something which is negotiable, needs to be changed, and that we will diplomatically support you in that.
I think
Thank
Ambassador Parthasarathy was nodding on your last point.
I think he said everything I should say, because really, there was a time, I don't want to name the government and the foreign minister involved, when we more or less took the position that this should be settled bilaterally. That was disastrous.
Yep.
It gave the Pakistanis too much sort of confidence. I think keep it boiling. You've got a Tehreek-e-Taliban. The Pakistanis accuse us of being the force behind the Tehreek-e-Taliban. You've got other groups operating. No Pashtun on either side worth his salt is going to accept the Durand line. In fact, I recall in 1990s, there was a Pakistani patrol which crossed the Durand line, and they said, "Ruk jao, sarhad par kar raha hai." So the answer to that from the Afghan was, "Kaun sa sarhad? Hamara sarhad to Sindhu Darya par hai." So it's very it's a touchy issue for them. Keep it boiling, because there are groups in Afghanistan, in Pakistan now, the Tehreek, which is the Nawaz PTM as it is called in Pakistan, which is really playing this up. So I think if they can play, this is a game two should play, and I'm afraid we are getting over it. But in the past, we have been far too relaxed and talking about morals and principles and non-interference. That's all right, as they say, it's good for the Marines, but it's not good for a country. Thank you.
Dr. Kartha, you want to finish off with your alphabet soup comment?
Okay.
No, thanks. I'm done.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. I think it's been an interesting discussion. Before I hand over to General Murthy, an interesting sort of analogy comes to my mind. We've been talking of graveyard of empires when we just spoke about China. And so in graveyard of empires in Afghanistan, they count the British first and then the Russians. And now the Americans have been added to the list. Are Chinese the next? Was the question that we were addressing. The analogy that I wanted to point out is having served for 3 years in Vietnam, what comes to my mind is that Vietnam also interestingly talks of having defeated 3 superpowers. Imperial France in 1953 at the Dien Bien Phu, the last battle, which of course was a superpower then. And then of course, we know the Americans for 19 years and then they left mid-70s. And they also very correctly, rightly talk about when they were, half of their military was invested in Cambodia in 1979. They gave the Chinese a bloody nose, and we know all about that land border war, because India and Vietnam have that border war in common, and many other things. So, and then the interesting thing that I wanted to point out, China is in the middle of both. US has also been a participant. So let's see how it ends up with China. Thank you very much. It remains for me to thank everyone, but thank you all very much for all the panelists, all the participants. A pleasure to have been there in this sharing space with you all. Over to you, sir, Jan Murthy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Satish. Many years ago, Salman Rushdie said, the fundamentalist seeks to bring down a great deal more than just buildings. Such people are against freedom of speech, the multi-party political system, universal adult suffrage, accountable government, Jews, homosexuals, women's rights, pluralism, secularism, short skirts, dancing, beardlessness, and the evolution theory. They are tyrants, not Muslims. Now, with that quote in mind, which all of us know, on behalf of all members of CASA, I thank our eminent panelists, Mr. G. Parthasarathy, Dr. Tara Kartha, and Brigadier Romel Dhaya for sharing their views with us in a most frank and comprehensive manner, as well as taking all the questions that were put forth. I thank the audience for your participation and for your deep interest, which was evident in the comments posted in the chat box, as well as the probing questions put forward to the panelists on the Q&A. I would also like to thank our moderator, General Satish Dua, for an excellent moderation of the session, Mr. Madhavan Shankar for the conduct of this webinar, and Ms. Barnali Singha Roy for her technical support. As CASA completes 2 years today, on behalf of the core committee, I wish to thank all its members and supporters for making CASA what it is today, a vibrant platform discussing issues and shaping conversations in a meaningful way while respecting each other's views. We look forward to your continued guidance and partnership, without which none of this would have been possible. A big thank you from all of us as we look forward to scaling greater heights together. A special word of thanks to my core committee, for without their active participation, none of this would have been possible. God bless. Jai Hind. Thank you all very much.
Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind, sir.